Good afternoon, good evening, good morning if you're in Australia, and welcome to this presentation about Charles Ives's monumental, or as I call it, Titanic piano sonata, second pianoforte sonata, Concord, Mass, 1840-1860, a work that I'm going to perform in its entirety on this coming Wednesday, the 6th of September, in the beautiful Northeast Harbor Library in Northeast Harbor, Maine. Today, what I would like to do is introduce you to the composer of this incredible work, Charles Edward Ives, talk a little bit about his background and his musical training, and a bit about the reason maybe why his music sounds as it does. Charles Ives was often criticized for being maybe not a particularly great composer because he used source material that was, shall we say, pre-composed or composed by other people. I think this just makes him a very interesting composer because he's using this quoted material as a way of referencing his personal experience. And I think that makes the music all the richer. It also draws connections to time and place. And for this sonata in particular, because what he's doing in this sonata is creating musical sketches of 4 authors associated with the Transcendentalist literary philosophical movement in the United States. And these 4 authors lived for various chunks of time in the town of Concord, Massachusetts, in the 20-year period between 1840 and 1860. And among these are Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, the Bronson Alcott family that included the more famous author Louisa May Alcott, and Henry David Thoreau. And what he's done here, and I'll just read so that I get it correct and straight from Ives's mouth, because he actually has a quote here about what his intentions are, that it is an attempt to present one person's impression of the spirit of transcendentalism that is associated in the minds of many with Concord, Mass of over a half-century ago. This is undertaken in impressionistic pictures of Emerson and Thoreau, a sketch of the Alcotts, and a scherzo supposed to reflect a lighter quality, which is often found in the fantastic side of Hawthorne. And I'm just continuing to read from my notes. The monumental second pianoforte sonata was mostly recomposed during the years 1911, 1912 from incomplete scores of a planned set of pieces, orchestral Men of Letters suite. So this included the Emerson Overture, the Hawthorne Concerto, the Orchard House Overture, Orchard House being the home of the Alcott family in Concord, and Walden Sounds. Of course, Walden Pond is famously associated with Henry David Thoreau, who built a cabin at the pond and spent a lot of time out there for a couple of years. In its incarnation as a sonata for solo piano, as I've just described, is the attempt to present the impressions of et cetera, et cetera. So I'm repeating myself. A little bit more background about the Emerson movement, because in that movement in particular is, it's almost like an archaeological expedition to find all of the tunes and all of the snippets of tunes that Ives has quoted in this particular movement. It's extraordinarily densely layered texture, contrapuntally very complex. It started off as an overture for with men's chorus. And of course, men, choirs and choral singing was very popular in the United States in the 19th century. And some of the earliest symphony orchestras in this country, including the Boston Symphony Orchestra, was actually kind of morphed out of an organization that was already in existence called the Handel and Haydn Society, which was dedicated to performing oratorios. So choral singing with orchestral accompaniment. Well, eventually the orchestral part started playing bigger works, and particularly the music of Beethoven was very popular in the mid-19th century in the United States with these. And so the orchestras started getting bigger and bigger. The choirs sort of fell off. So in that sense, we have this long tradition of choral singing. And so this Men of Letters, Emerson overture with men's chorus, not at all a surprise, but then Ives kept working with this movement. He couldn't leave it alone. Then he decided, okay, he was going to add a piano part. The piano part then started getting very big, and he thought, well, maybe I'm going to get rid of the choir and I'm going to turn this into a piano concerto orchestra with piano solo. Well, eventually the piano cadenzas started taking over, and he decided to scrap the orchestra altogether. So it went through this very interesting cycle of transformation. And so let me, I've got so many things that I want to share with you today, and I feel like I'm kind of going already a bit out of order, because I thought it might be worth sharing with you my personal experience with this piece of music. And I was introduced to Ives's music more than 50 years ago. As a university freshman, I had never heard a note of Ives's music. But I had been brought up in what we would call, a sort of a fundamentalist Christian religious environment. And I used to sight read. That's how I learned how to play the piano. I sight read the hymnal, back to front, front to back, middle to end and back, over and over and over again. So these hymn tunes I am absolutely pickled in these hymn tunes. Then also, as I was growing up, I started hearing about this kind of music called ragtime. And a cousin of mine who's recently deceased, Dr. Reed Walker, he played the organ, and he used to talk about ragging the hymns. And I thought, what's this about ragging the hymns? Well, I get to university and I'm playing for church services to earn money and feed myself while I'm going to school. And I also discovered that our library had the recently published complete collection of the rags of Scott Joplin. Well, I had it out on pretty much permanent loan, and I used to just carry it around, and anytime I was near a piano, I would sight read these rags. So one of my colleagues at university came up to me one day, he says, you're so keen on ragtime, and you got hymns, you're just like inside and out these hymn tunes. You should get to know the music of an insurance salesman named Charles Ives, who wrote 2 piano sonatas that are so hard, nobody can play them. So I just said, and this is without having ever heard a note of Ives's music, I said, that's impossible. I can't believe there's any such thing as music. That's too hard to play. I'm going to learn them, and I'm going to play them. So I trotted off to the library, and sadly, all I could find at that point was the first piano sonata. I did not find the Concord. Well, I shouldn't say sadly. That was fantastic to find the first piano sonata. So the first piano sonata was the first that I learned. When I got to the point of learning the Concord sonata, I realized that I considered them to be 2 sides of Ives's musical autobiography. And the first piano sonata is very, very rich in hymn tune quotations and ragtime references. And it's, but I consider that to be more connected to his early upbringing when he was playing piano and organ in the church services. So Ives himself had a similar background, shall we say, just growing up in a very religious environment, and hymn tunes were, he was steeped in them at pretty much as I was. But the other interesting thing about Ives's upbringing was his father, who was an incredibly adventurous musician. He was the town band master, and he was responsible for leading the bands of 3 different communities, not just Danbury, Connecticut, but Bethel, and I just now forget the other one, the Bristol band. And there are stories of George Ives having brought all 3 bands to Danbury at one point, and he had the 3 bands marching around the town square, each playing a different march. This is a very significant fact about then Charles Ives and his sense of layering sounds, but not necessarily even lined up. It's like we wouldn't necessarily hear these 3 marches all starting at the same time. It's like they would be kind of in canon or slightly offset from each other. And we will hear this kind of, shall we say, interrupting, but they don't interrupt, they just kind of come in and continue layered on top of each other. The 4th symphony is a terrific example of this, because then you've got a full symphony orchestra that can be subdivided into different sections that then are playing exactly in this way. As a pianist, I've got 10 fingers. Sometimes it gets a bit intense, as you will hear. The other thing that Ives's father did was give him a very thorough grounding in counterpoint. And this was through the study of the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. And we know that Bach was really the master of counterpoint. Counterpoint meaning, from the Latin, punctus contra punctus, point against point, note against note. So literally, anytime I have more than one sound at the same time, this is counterpoint, because now I have 2 lines that are sort of working in relation to each other. And that can even be just playing together. This is a consonant sort of counterpoint. And I just want to give you an example then of how Bach, in one of his most complex fugues, uses counterpoint. So, and a fugue has typically one subject, which is the main idea. And then we might have counter subjects. In this particular fugue, what we have are 3 distinct subjects. As I say, it's very complex, and it also has 5 voices. And I want to play a little of it for you, because it's a good example of the kind of textures that Ives probably would have been hearing and studying. And I think it's a very good insight into, in particular, the Emerson movement. So if this is our initial subject, slow moving, and only 5 notes long. So I hear it here, and then I'm going to hear all 5 voices coming in. So here's the next voice. Here's the next one. Here's the next one. Here's the next one. subject juxtaposed over the top of the first. So the second subject is in the top voice, and the first subject is now in the tenor voice. Now here is the first subject again in the bottom voice. Now the second subject is inverted, meaning it's turned upside down. So instead of the intervals going up and then down, up and down, they go down and up, down and up. Okay, so it's still the subject, still the second subject, but it is now, as we say, this is what we call in the inversion. Second subject. Here's the third subject. Really thick, but it's like all subjects, and sometimes the subjects are even, again, like those marching bands, they come in on top of each other, so the first subject is not even finished before the second version of the first subject crowds in on top of it. This is what we call a stretto, meaning tight. So I think that's worth giving that little bit of background, because now I'm going to tell you about the hymn tunes that Ives uses in the Emerson movement. And we have, and I mentioned Beethoven and the symphony orchestras. So one of the most popular pieces that the orchestras were playing by Ludwig van Beethoven was his Fifth Symphony, and it's like just so famous. So this also then got this we call it a motto or a motivic idea. So 3 repeated notes dropping in musical jargon, a minor, a major third. That's the same thing. Ives takes this 4-note motive, and which was so popular that the Transcendentalists kind of latched onto it, and it was already being somehow or other, I don't know where the origin of it being called the fate knocking motive, but the Transcendentalists picked up on the fate, the notion of fate, and Ives himself talks about in his references to in his memos, in his essays before Sonata, which I actually don't have the copy of that printed out, but he talks about there is an oracle at the beginning of the Fifth Symphony. In those 4 notes lie one of Beethoven's greatest messages. We would place its translation above the relentlessness of fate knocking at the door, above the greater human message of destiny, and strive to bring it towards the spiritual message of Emerson's revelations, even to the common heart of Concord, the soul of humanity knocking at the door of the divine mysteries, radiant in the faith that it will be opened and that the human will become the divine. So in order to convey the grandeur, shall we say, of Emerson's mind, which was tremendous, and if you've read any of his essays, for example, there you have like a sort of crystallized form, like this really beautiful essence of the way his mind worked. And he had a bit like Ives's experience, and I dare I say, a bit like my experience, you know, growing, there was this, you know, in America at that point in time, there was this still a very strong Puritan tradition, which was very original sin based. But in the 19th century, there was this new spirit kind of emerging that was coming from the East. And there was an influence on the thinkers that, and the Transcendentalist thinkers were definitely influenced by even, let's just say, Buddhist thought, which then kind of took that notion of original sin and just said that, you know, this does not exist. It's like human beings are already divine. They are already perfect. And through a process of meditation and self-knowledge and self-revelation, that's the pathway to the divine truth. And if we look at the first piano sonata as his kind of rambling around his youth with all the hymn tunes, and then we move into the second pianoforte sonata, and where this is now more about a different quality of spirituality that he's exploring. So he uses the fate knocking motive. This is a feature of every movement in this sonata. So Beethoven fifth fate knocking motive is a link that connects all four of the movements. The other tune, which is Ives's own creation. Now, Ives didn't just quote other people, he did make up his own tunes, and this is one of the most important of the tunes that we hear, and maybe it's easiest if I play a little bit of the Alcott's movement, just the most translucent, shall we say. Because here's the Beethoven fifth. Another feature of Ives's music, what we would call bitonality. So we've got bottom in the key of A flat, and then we hear the human faith melody. And here's Beethoven again. So that sort of sets the scene for the Alcott. In the Emerson movement, and I'll just play the opening of this, you'll hear that the human faith melody is here. So it's this rising, and then it goes up 3 notes and falls. So it's similar in a way, it has that 4-note kind of very recognizable opening, a bit like, but it does go on. So the tune is actually and then often he will then continue with the faint motive. So here's what it sounds like just in the very opening of Emerson, which it's interesting how we start with a single note and then he moves in very tight monasticism, which is another feature of his music that makes it a bit challenging for people to listen to initially. actually heard the opening of the Human Faith melody, and then we've heard the Fate motive twice. It's a little bit buried here. It's down to bass. So then, the next significant tune that again suffuses this entire sonata in varying degrees is the hymn tune Bethany. And this, very interesting to me, that Ives had this fascination, and probably everybody did, you know, back in those days, because these massive steamships were leaving port of New York and sailing across the Atlantic, taking hordes of people back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. It was hang on, I've written down the date here. Let me give it to you precisely. 15th of April, 1912, the Titanic sank on its maiden voyage from Queenstown in the United Kingdom to New York City. Well, Ives was in the middle of writing this music, but you know, he'd already conceived, I think, a great deal of the music, of the, you know, the tunes, I'm sure, were already, because of 1911, if in fact, and he would have been already imagining this music before this event. And I'm not sure at what point it became common knowledge or how the news would have been broadcast that apparently, this is the story, is that the orchestra, because these huge cruise liners had orchestras that played in the ballrooms and people danced and had a good time. And apparently as the ship's going down and the orchestra is going with it, but they were apparently playing this tune. So I asked myself, why is what was it that about this particular tune that he found so compelling that it became really, it's like you just hear fragments of it all the way through this sonata. And the first time that we hear it is right there where I just stopped playing after the Fate motive. It's here. It's quite unmistakable. But then he's also layering, again, going back to our Bach triple fugue, he's already layering stuff, because now we've got Bethany, this little couple of notes out of from the start of Bethany, and we have the Human Faith melody in the bass. This. Okay, so we've already, like, you know, we're barely like 10 seconds into the piece, and we've already got all these references to these tunes that have very special significance, the Fate to the Transcendentalist, and obviously to Ives himself, and the hymn tune reference, which is again a reference back to his childhood, his growing up, and this his sort of fundamental spirituality, shall we say it, but then layering that on the top of his more transcendentalist spirituality, which I find quite marvelous. Anyway, the next thing that happens is he introduces a tune that you just kind of go, what's that doing here? And I just figured this out in recent times, and I'm still getting my head around the fact that he would quote this. This is the desire and longing motive from Wagner's Tristan und Isolde. And here's what it sounds like when Ives does it. So it's a bit disguised. But I kept thinking, what is that? Because it comes back, he uses this again quite a lot, and it's a real feature of this movement in particular. And I will show you a bit later, very shortly, how he layers this, and he uses these interesting contrapuntal techniques like the inversion technique to create a slightly different take on it. So when we hear this, so after we've had Bethany and Human Faith duet, here's Bethany again. Necessarily always get the rhythm that's associated with the tune, but we definitely get the pitches and we get the contour. And to me, that is what it is. I'm absolutely sure of it. Then again, against our Tristan longing desire motive, we have, he's already introducing the idea that he uses as what I call his second theme, which is, and that comes up here. Okay, so he introduces that here against the Tristan motive, which is here. And again, it's only a chunk of it. It's only 4 notes, but so Tristan, second theme, Bethany, H, bass. There's another tune here. This is from, again, sometimes I find stuff that other people haven't quite come up with, and so, you know, they probably think I'm a bit nuts, which I am. It's freely admitted. But this comes from a tune that I've also used very significantly in his 3rd violin sonata. Okay, so when we hear this, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong key there. I should have done it in the right key, but sorry. It's a bit obscure, but I hear it. And again, this is why I say I'm pickled in hymn tunes, because, and the thing about hymn tunes too, if you study hymn tunes enough, you start hearing how they're like motivic ideas, intervallic procedures, ideas that just are just recycled in just about every single hymn tune is going to use at least maybe 2 or 3 note configurations that are somehow or other similar. So, and this is something that Ives was very keenly aware of too. And he sometimes will he will conflate 2 different hymn tunes for that reason, because he can sort of take the beginning of one and stick it onto the end of another one. And it works, because it's like there, again, these similarities make it quite I don't know, easy, I guess, to do that. So now where was I? I'm here. I need the here is the often continue the fade motive by playing the repeated notes again, but instead of going down. Again. Now, I don't have time to go through the entire piece, but I could do that. And it would take us a couple of hours, and I would show you every fragment of every tune, because it's like the piece is completely saturated with this. But that gives you a bit of an idea of the complexity, and yet, for me, I guess, after 45 years of playing this piece, it's like, it's not mysterious to me anymore. I mean, it's mysterious. It's mysterious in that endlessly fascinating way, but it's like, because I know what to look for, I keep finding it everywhere, and it just gets more and more rich. And I'll just read this beautiful thing that Ives said about the second piano sonata. He says, "This is, as far as I know, the only piece which, every time I play it or turn to it, seems unfinished." And yes, this is my experience. It is forever unfinished. And after 45 years of playing it, every time I take it out again, because I don't play it every single day of the last 45 years, it gets put away, and then there's other programs that come to the fore. And sometimes for years I don't look at this piece, but when I bring it out again, something's been going on in the back of my mind with this music, because I'll sit down and I'll start playing it, and suddenly I'll hear something that I hadn't heard before. And I think, yeah, why didn't I ever notice that before? And I will confess that I do not listen to anybody else's recordings. It's like, I guess this is how I am. I really want this to be my piece, my interpretation, my excavation, my journey of discovery into the depths of Ives's mind and his creative spirit and his philosophical sense of taking the literary ideas and translating them into music. And then because again, I'm sort of weaving in and out of musical analysis and transcendental discussion. This is from the prologue to Ives's essays before sonata. So Ives created his own set of essays, which again are in a way modeled upon Emerson's essays. They're not quite as, shall we say, Emerson's essays are a bit more, the word preachy comes to mind. Well, he was a minister for a while, so perhaps there is that. It's kind of like he makes statements about things. Ives tends to ask questions in his essays. So he starts off in his prologue. How far is anyone justified, be he an authority or a layman, in expressing or trying to express in terms of music, bracket, in sounds, if you like, and bracket, the value of anything material, moral, intellectual, or spiritual, which is usually expressed in terms other than music? How far afield can music go and keep honest as well as reasonable or artistic? Is it a matter limited only by the composer's power of expressing what lies in his subjective or objective consciousness? Or is it limited by any limitations of the composer? Can a tune literally represent a stone wall with vines on it or with nothing on it? Though it, again, brackets, the tune be made by a genius whose power of objective contemplation is in the highest state of development? Can it be done by anything short of an act of mesmerism on the part of the composer or an act of kindness on the part of the listener? And he goes on. So it gives you this idea of how Ives was responding to not just to Emerson's way of thinking, but it's also his own inquiry into the nature of music, the deeper nature of music. And then there's a lot of discussion about what he calls the relationship between manner, which would be kind of what I've just been describing here, the manner or the means, the sort of the actual physical way, the notes on paper, the way they sound, the manner versus the substance of the music. And the substance of the music then is what we're referring to here, this expressing this spirituality and with these tunes that either he's created or he's kind of fashioned out of conglomerations of hymn tunes or conflations of hymn tunes, etc. Yeah, it's a very interesting philosophical debate. Now, I want to show you this very interesting place. Oh, by the way, so the Emerson movement, again, for those of you that are familiar with musical jargon and the idea of musical structure, musical form, the Emerson movement is actually in what we would call single movement sonata form, although it is very, very highly embellished sonata form. But we do have an exposition, and I've just described how the exposition, or part of the exposition, consists of the introduction of these hymn tunes. There are three distinct parts to this exposition. There's and plus an introduction. Then we come to what we call the development section of the sonata form, and the development section in this particular case, this sonata is a theme and variations based upon Bethany. So he's taken away the rhythmic aspect and he's turned it into straight quavers. So this is first variation. It's interesting that to tell you like what he does here is he actually takes the tune and using octave displacement, which is a technique that he liked to do, and also his father used to say to him, well, okay, if you're going to practice scales, play them like a man. So it wasn't like you just kind of go one interval tight to the other. You actually add a whole octave between the notes. So this is what he's doing here in this first variation. So instead of going, he goes, takes it up an octave, and that's another octave. Then instead of this, okay, so he goes up the octave here, back to the original, then drops an octave, and another octave. So original, variation. And we have several variations here, which are fantastic, but again, I don't have time to do all that, so hopefully you will be able to come on Wednesday night. And by the way, may I introduce Peter Rogers, who is going to read the script that comprises extracts from Emerson and from the four authors, Emerson, Hawthorne. In the case of Alcott, it's going to be Louisa May, because I think that an extract from Little Women really sets the scene for this particular movement in a more, in a better way, a more convincing way, shall we say, than Bronson, he was a very intense thinker, a bit like Emerson, and then with Thoreau. And there will also be some readings from Ives's essays before Sonata. So anyway, so that's Wednesday at 5:30. I hope you will join us for that. But here's this amazing place, and this is where we get this interesting contrapuntal texturing and the layering and the inverting of the tree stump idea. So this is actually, we're in we've already reached the recapitulation, which is the return of the opening material. So we have this kind of closed structure. Exposition, recapitulation tend to be similar in, and then the middle section, the development section in this particular case is quite different, being this theme and variations. But here we have, I'll just play it for you. I'll leave it there for now because there's already so much going on in here. So we've got the second theme on the top, so that's pretty obvious. Then here's Bethany. Here's Bethany. In the bottom, we have Tristan. And so then when I play them all together, the second theme is in the tenor. Now here's Tristan in the bass and second theme in the top again. Second theme is now in the middle, in the alto voice or kind of tenor down here. Here's Tristan on the bottom. And then here we have the inverted version of Tristan, which is so the other thing about Ives's music, and I'll say this, I think that there's a kind of, how should I say this, a notion that Ives's music is hard and that it should sound hard. To me, it's not hard. To me, this is so soft in terms of, I don't hear hard edges. I mean, there are some places where Ives actually says he wants it to sound like, kind of crash and burn. And that's at the very end where we get the fake motive here. And he says, these chords are but the knocks on the portal and are played more as bang than as music. And so he specifically, it's hard there. But we have Emerson, who was a great orator, and he wrote his prose is what he is best known for, but he was also a poet. And I think that when I read Emerson, for me, everything is poetry. And for me, everything in this piece is poetry at some level. And so I really tend to take a very lyrical approach to the way that I play this piece. And even the really sort of densely contrapuntal pieces, other places tend to be, at least over the years, I've managed to find a way to make them also very lyrical. Let's move on. It's like about 10 minutes to 3. I'll just quickly go through a little bit of these. Oops, I'm stuck. The other movements. The Hawthorne movement, as Ives describes it, is a little scherzo intended to show the lighter side of, or more fantastic side of, excuse me, I think it's time for a little moistening of the throat. And if you've read, so the inspiration for this movement goes actually back to John Bunyan, the Pilgrim's Progress. And the Pilgrim's Progress, maybe you're familiar with it, but it's a story of Christian who he lives in the city of destruction, and he is trying to make his way to the celestial city. And so this is so Hawthorne was fascinated by the Pilgrim's Progress. In fact, it was his favorite book. It was one of the first books that he ever read as a child, and it really stayed with him. So then he created his own version of the Pilgrim's Progress that he calls the Celestial Railroad. And so in his story, which is absolutely worth a read, it's part of the Mosses from the Old Maps series of short stories. Another story that is in Mosses from the Old Maps is Feathertop. And we have a reference to Feathertop, who was a scarecrow, and his mistress, she would get him to bring coals for her pipe, and so he would dance around the rim of her pipe. And so we have a reference to that here, but you'll hear it's a very different kind of writing right from the get-go here. Immediately sneaks in the human faith melody. This is also the movement where we have the most direct references to a ragtimey sort of approach to playing. I'll put my glasses on. I do play this piece without the score, but today, since I'm picking and choosing here, I will use this. And ragtime, so the first rag is attributed to Thomas Turpin. That was 1892. So Ives was, he was a teenager, and this whole ragtime idea was very much in the air. It was around, shall we say. And when he went to Yale in 1894, he found himself frequently at a theater in town called Polly's. And this was a place where vaudeville shows, even blackface minstrel shows would be mounted in production, and also the early silent films. And Ives would sometimes spell the piano player. And so I hear this kind of silent film comping in this piece. And so, because it's very episodic and a bit kind of, just a bit, it's like a constant shifting of the scene. And why am I not finding these ragtime bits? It's because, here we go. So if I were to play this, That heavily syncopated kind of oompa bass, which is characteristic of ragtime, and ragtime then is also very closely connected to the march. And that was, again, going back to Ives's childhood, and he was definitely brought up on marches. The other thing that's very interesting in the Hawthorne movement is this, which my dear brother, I said, I need a piece of wood, because I forgot to bring mine. It's not that I forgot, but I kind of lost mine along the way. So I was using a very inferior substitute. And I said, Brian, I need a piece of wood that's about this long. Would you believe that he actually walked out to his workshop and he brought me this piece of wood that's exactly the right length? Well, he sanded it down and prettied it up, and I put the felt on it. This is used to play all of these notes at the same time. It's just like this. And the idea was that this was going to actually be an off-stage piano, and that these sounds would be heard as what he refers to as overtones. But, you know, since I'm only one person playing it all by myself, and then this is the substituted note, you know, these are meant to be played really, really softly, which I will endeavor to do better on Wednesday night. And so that's a very interesting feature of his particular movement. And the other things that we hear in this movement is he starts revving up to, well, you may recognize this. This is another boat story. The ocean, and we actually get here's fate. This movement is it's rollicking and a bit riotous and really fun. Then we come to the Alcott, which so far we've had all of these other tunes, and once again we hear this is where we hear, and we hear this is another hymn tune which bears a very marked resemblance to the Fate motive, because it actually uses the Fate motive, except that we add one pitch to it. The Christian heralds go proclaim the missionary chant. And then here we have Fate. So he starts off the Alcotts. And I've already played a bit of that for you before, so I'll keep going through here, because we do have two new tunes that he quotes in this movement. Well, there's a tune that's yet unidentified, and again, this is maybe Ives' very own version of the Scottish folk tune. And this is the other tune, which is very recognizable. Once again, Bach appears. The bridal chorus from Lohengrin. And here we have a minstrel tune by A.F. Whittemore, Stop That Knocking at the Door. This was actually made popular by the famous Christie's minstrels. And I'm not very good at doing the dialect, which you know, that was a feature of the minstrel shows. Minstrel tunes was that the lyrics were often nonsensical, and they were almost invariably set in what the composer imagined to be the dialect, the manner of speaking of the African Americans, who at that point were still, well, either still enslaved or recently freed. So here, I once did love a colored cow. Whose name was Susie Brown. Was the fairest in the town. Okay, so that's the absolutely, you know, almost verbatim. Then this digresses. So those are the principal tunes that we hear, again, adding two new ones over and above what we've already heard in the sonata. And then Thoreau is really the most impressionistic. It's almost Debussyan in its textures, and you know, we have the mist rising over Walden Pond here at the beginning. Early morning. And he's actually already quoted the tune. It's like barely noticeable, but the new tune that he introduces in this movement, which is another minstrel tune, this one written by Stephen Foster, and it's called Massa in the Cold, Cold Ground. And we know that the Transcendentalists were ardent abolitionists, and I like to think that this had something to do, this is Ives's way of perhaps referencing masses in the cold, cold ground, perhaps the end of slavery, maybe he's making a reference to this, but he also does it in this very haunting way. At the end of it, so again, this is like a day in the life of Henry David Thoreau at Walden Pond, and he played the flute. He maybe wasn't like a Boston Symphony Orchestra caliber, but he loved to sit by the lake, or actually paddle out in a canoe into the middle of the lake at evening as the sun was going down, and played his flute. So we actually have Alison Krieger, who is the Associate Director of the Bar Harbor Festival, who's going to join us on Wednesday evening and play the beautiful flute solo at the very end of the Thoreau movement, which again is the human faith melody. So except the way Ives accompanies, or the way I would comp her. So it's quite different when we add the piano. And the piece ends again with more down into cornfield, down into cornfield. And after this huge journey that we've been on that starts with the extremely powerful and passionate exhortations and poetic of Ralph Waldo Emerson, through the fantastical celestial railroad journey of Nathaniel Hawthorne, the peaceful family home life as illustrated in the Alcott's movement, to Thoreau enjoying the setting of the sun over Walden Pond. That's Charles Ives's Concord Sonata. And since I am a dual citizen of the United States and Australia, and I've spent about 30 years of my life in Australia, people often ask me where home is. And then I grew up in Philadelphia, and that's where my family is now. And but I have a home in New Mexico. And so people say, well, where's home? And I had a long think about it, and I realized that home for me is the Concord Sonata. So thank you for being here. Thanks to everyone who's watching on Zoom and who will watch later on, perhaps. And hopefully a few folks will come along on Wednesday evening to hear the performance. So, and thanks to the Northeast Harbor Library staff for inviting me and having me here, and for helping to produce this event today.
Do you want to do a short Q&A, or?
Well, if anyone has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know about your biography, and I'd like to, where did you talked about university, where did you grow up and where did you go to school? And because if you lived in Australia, maybe?
Well, I was born in Philadelphia, and that's where I spent the first 18 years of my life. Then I started going to university, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, initially, then the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, then the Eastman School of Music. I did my doctorate in music there. And then I started teaching at university. So I had a job in North Carolina, East Carolina University, and then Duke University. So I was there 11 years. And then I moved back to Pennsylvania. And then I applied for Fulbright Foundation Fellowship to go to Australia, and I got it. So then I was over there for 4 months giving concerts in 1992. And then I got invited back by several of the universities that I had, or conservatories that I had performed at in 92. And then I was offered a position as head of keyboard in the Victorian College of the Arts in Melbourne in 95. And I finished my work there in 2015, and I've continued to go back there every year, except COVID shut me down for 3 years, as it shut a lot of people down. So that's.
So you got interested in Ives at Indiana University in Pennsylvania.
I'm sorry?
So that you said you
yeah, my friend, the person that introduced me to Ives's music, was one of my fellow students there.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, no, I just was, I just was curious when you were where you, because And you talked about coming from a fundamentalist family. I was just.
My mother's family were among the early settlers of Pennsylvania, having come from Germany. They were Anabaptists, Church of the Brethren, and they were like seeking, as so many people that were coming to the United States at that point in time, and particularly to Pennsylvania, were seeking religious refuge. So my roots in the Church of the Brethren go back centuries. Yeah.
Do you know, I'm not sure exactly how the timelines line up here, so this might be a vague question, but was there any direct relationship or commentary between Schoenberg?
I'm sorry, say that, a direct relationship?
You know, yeah, there's any direct interaction or commentary between Schoenberg and Ives?
Oh, no, none at all. And Ives, okay, so there's a lot of controversy out there about whether Ives was acquainted with a lot of these innovations, shall we say, in musical language, which were taking place at the end of the 19th and into the early 20th century. And one of the most significant of those being Schoenberg's 12-tone system, if you call it that, of musical language. So the diatonic system, using the 7 pitches of the major or minor scale, that was sort of fundamental for a couple hundred years. Schoenberg decided that he wanted to try and avoid this tonal stress, shall we call it, because within that tonal system, we have this tonic dominant to tonic pull, shall we say, and that really drives the formal structures of just about every piece of music from Bach up until we get into the 20th century. Even Ives's music has similar processes at work, because I consider this music to be tonal. Even though it's very chromatic, it is still very tonal. And but with Schoenberg, what he wanted to do was to obliterate the sense of tonality. And so he took pitches of the chromatic scale, and then he came up with this idea of ordering them so they wouldn't necessarily just be like this. He would maybe start with this, his pitch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm running out fingers, 12. That would be my row. And then that row, so I was talking earlier about the Bach contrapuntal techniques, we could go in the original or prime form. We can turn it upside down or invert all of the intervals. We can go backwards, so we could start at the end and go backwards, that's retrograde, or we can go retrograde inversion. So you have 4, what we call permutations of the prime row, plus you have all 12 transpositions of that row. So 48 versions of the row that can be then used as the grammatical material, if you want to call it that, for creating pieces of music. And it sounds a bit cut and dry, but you know, in my experience working with 12-tone music, the really good composers that are working with this language produce some really fantastic compositions, very moving, poignant, and yeah, just quite beautiful. So Ives is, I mean, he did not live in a vacuum, but he was very isolated. And he probably knew about Schoenberg, but it's not like he was copying Schoenberg. But he also did not create a 12-tone row system in the way that Schoenberg did. He used all pitches of the chromatic scale, and there are pieces in which, yes, you can identify that he's got all 12 pitches happening, but it's not like he uses them in a methodical way, like that he's done this 48 permutations of that he methodically applies that to a piece of music. And so, but yeah, Ives lived at an incredibly interesting time in music history. I mean, we had, there were so many different versions of avoiding tonality going on. And Ives does his bit by adding a lot of chromaticism, but, and Schoenberg had his way of doing it. Bela Bartok in Hungary, he had his approach to it, so his music is largely, he uses the Romanian and Eastern European folk music, but he also created his own system of tonality that he called the axis system. So it's like there was a lot of experimentation going on. It was a very heady time in music history. People kind of breaking away from this common practice period approach to form, structure, tonality, melody even. And so, yeah, Ives has a very particular way of approaching musical composition, but it comes directly out of his experience growing up and the way that he has taken the sounds of his musical life and then weaves them into these fabulous musical tapestries and narratives.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone.
Just about. It's running out of the chat.
I like